Hi neighbors, Bob Harke here, once again your host of America on Edge. We're going to have another one of those very special visits with some of our very remarkable guests here from the Monterey County AIDS Project in California. My special guests today are Carie Ford, Director of Client Services, and Jim Ritter, Staff Volunteer Coordinator with the Monterey County AIDS Project. We'll be right back with these wonderful young people after these important words. Jim, Carie, it's been several weeks since we last got together here on America on Edge. What's transpiring down there in Monterey County now in terms of the AIDS Project?
Well, unfortunately, our caseload continues to grow, and to meet that challenge, we've actually expanded our offices now. The county that we serve is very large geographically, and so we've opened up a new office in Salinas, and so to better serve the South County and North County. And we're also going to be hiring 2 new staff people. Both of them should be on board by the middle of this coming summer.
Oh, that's fantastic. Is this the enlargement of your caseload? And is this expanding or exploding?
I would say it's exploding. In about the last 9 or 10 months, the caseload has about tripled from 60 clients to about 175 clients.
Is this telling us something that maybe we should share with our viewers?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for it. In February, we had our HIV/AIDS Awareness Week, and so we really got the word out to people about being tested and about that HIV is here and people need to get informed. And I think more people are just becoming more aware that they're at risk, and that they need to start taking care of themselves.
Are you folks making that extraordinarily important penetration into the teenage group yet? Are you seeing any results, for instance, because of the Not Me special and working with your own staff in conjunction with that?
Well, we're hoping that with more teen awareness that we won't be seeing those people as clients, but that they're more aware, so they're going to be either practicing abstinence or safer sex. We don't have a large influx of teen people who are HIV positive, thank goodness so far. But we are, with the more outreach we do in education, telling people that it's better to get tested and get into the medical care system and get support. That is bringing more people into our caseload, people who we're providing supportive services to.
Yeah. Are you getting the cooperation from the community at large now? Do you find increased willingness to participate in your programs? Churches, schools, and what have you?
I think it's constantly increasing. And I think the reason for the increase is because as the numbers of people who are infected grow, the numbers of people who know somebody who's infected continues to grow. And those people, a lot of the volunteers who come in, a lot of people who want to support us are people who have family members or friends or people who they work with who are HIV positive, so they want to get involved. So kind of as the epidemic grows, the volunteer base also grows. It looks, though, like it's not an equal amount. Like our caseload has tripled, but our volunteers have maybe doubled. And the funding has maybe doubled, but not tripled as the caseload is.
Yeah. Any breakdown in demographics that might show what the most at-risk group is today?
Demographics are difficult because there's worldwide statistics, national statistics, county statistics, and then there's just the statistics that we keep as an agency. And I can just tell you that we have about 25% of the people who I'm working with are women. 40% are either got infected through heterosexual sex or from intravenous drug use, and then about 60% are still men from the gay community. So that's kind of our breakdown that we're seeing, and that almost extrapolates into national statistics.
But there's another thing, though, about statistics is that we're dealing, first of all, just with people that have come forward to be our clients.
Yeah.
And the statistics with the county and the federal government and all this are dealing with diagnosed cases.
Of AIDS.
And so that really doesn't deal with the people that are infected, people that are just HIV positive. It doesn't deal with people that don't know they're infected.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see.
So it's not it's questionable how accurate the statistics really could be.
Yeah. I noticed very recently the mayor of San Francisco has taken a bold stand in authorizing the dispensing of fresh needles. saying, I guess he did it legally by declaring a health emergency. And that goes right in line with what we were talking about on our previous show. And that's certainly a great step forward, I would imagine. Have we gotten anywhere with this sort of thing within the context of the Monterey area now? You've got the needles going out, but you've got a lot of community antagonism as a result. Is that settling down, or is it still as irrational as it has been?
Do you want to answer that, or want me to?
There are people that are exchanging needles, and they're getting the clean needles out to the people that need them. And it's, from what I've seen, it tends to be pretty quiet. There have been
as far as legal complications.
Right, and as far as the law enforcement and whether they support it or oppose it, we're not seeing a lot of protests or demonstrations or arrests. That kind of thing. It's actually pretty low-key.
The Monterey County AIDS Project isn't able, we support needle exchange, but our staff people, our volunteers, can't be a part of needle exchange through our project, because that puts us all at risk, because it is illegal. But we do refer people to the needle exchange project that is happening and working illegally. And they're exchanging about 700 needles a week. 700 a week in Monterey County.
Santa Cruz County, I understand, has had an ongoing program there with clean needle dispensing.
And I don't know what their figures are for how much, but actually our staff person, who's a community health outreach worker, who's also an advocate for needle exchange, started out in Santa Cruz County. So we kind of have that tie with them.
Our last program, I guess, we devoted all too little time to the concept of abstinence. And I would like to elicit from you some thoughts on those lines, given the only 100% absolutely certain way of avoiding HIV infection is to be celibate, complete abstinence, I guess you'd call it. The best condom in the world is not foolproof, and you've got to know how to use them properly. What kind of information do you give to those who stop by the clinic in terms of talking about abstinence as well as what safe behavior?
You said we spent too little time on abstinence.
On the talk.
Right, and I just kind of, my response to that is, I mean, how much time can you really spend on abstinence? It's a given fact that it's the only 100% way of being clean from, getting HIV, either whether you're being abstinent from sex or from injection drug use. And that's just a fact, but we kind of need to spend more time on explaining to people about safer sex and how to negotiate having your partner wear a condom. There's just so much more to safer sex. I think that people need to know. I can see what you're saying there. Again, with the folks we had on another program, the producers of the Not Me show went on to tell us that it was a matter of being able to convey the concept of abstinence to the teenager that's not being done effectively. And I'm wondering, are we missing a boat as a community and not somehow finding out how we get this message across? Here these kids are, that they finally found out what sex is all about. And so you say, well, abstain. And everything in this kid is screaming out, no, I wanna. Okay? How do you intelligently converse with the kid in terms he can understand that it's his life he's talking about? That we're not talking about a social impropriety. We're not talking about getting his girlfriend pregnant. We're talking about life and death. How do you get this across to a kid so that he will understand it? It would be my guess that the best way is peer education for other teens, like in the Not Me video, that there's one teenager in there who's saying abstinence is the only choice for me. That maybe I think that if adults coming in, teachers coming in, parents coming in and telling teenagers, abstinence is the best choice for you, they aren't going to listen as much as if it's one of their peers talking about abstinence is my choice, and kind of maybe they can relate to that a little more.
Any thoughts on that yourself, Jim?
Yeah. Carie and I would both agree that abstinence is the only way to stop the spread of AIDS. It's probably the best way to go. But the thing that I think about is the reality of what's going on. Abstinence
idealism is
and wouldn't we all love it if everyone was in a monogamous relationship, strictly inside a marriage, and if people were abstinent before marriage, that's the ideal, but what's the reality of it? And I think any adult only has to look at how they were when they were kids and remember what it was like. And people should be able to start to realize how challenging it is to get across to the teens how serious this is.
I think, though, we also have to always remember when talking about abstinence that we are talking about abstinence from sex and abstinence from needle use. Because I've seen people who have been having all kinds of unsafe sex, but not sharing needles, or people who are sharing needles but not having unsafe sex, and they confuse the two and remember that they need to abstain from both if that's what they're going to do.
And we'll be getting back on a further discussion not only of abstinence and of safe sex. We're going to take a break now, see a couple of commercial spots from sponsors, and I'm also going to have the viewers pay special attention to a billboard that'll be on here showing the AIDS project in your city or your state throughout the United States here, where you can contact them personally for more information about your family or your children and the risks they have involved with the AIDS epidemic we have in the country today. We'll be back in a moment.
Mom, Dad, there's something I can't tell you. I'm thinking about having sex. Could you tell me about AIDS? Mom, Dad, there's something I can't tell you. I just had sex. Could you tell me about AIDS? Mom, Dad, there's something I can't tell you. I just had a test. I think I could have AIDS.
I really love my production crew. During our commercial break here, one came up and asked Jim here, did I really do any volunteer work over at the AIDS Project? And you had better come up with a good answer, young fella.
I've got a little time left to think of one now.
Now get me off the hook, because I told you I promised I would become involved, and I'm serious now, so be serious.
Bob, I want to thank you for getting involved with the HIV/AIDS Awareness Week we had, and getting involved with the Not Me video distribution, and working with Joe Long, who is our Director of Marketing and Public Relations, and working with the TV station, and we really appreciate that. Seriously, honestly.
And I seriously have said it's a blessing and a privilege to be able to do that, but you have gotten me off the hook now, because I have done exactly what I said I would do, and I thank you for that, and it's for the cameraman who asked that question, go to the unemployment line, you scoundrel, you.
And I'd like to add that we'd love to have you back, if in a continuing volunteer effort too.
I will be delighted to be a continuing volunteer on one condition and one condition alone. No money in the world is needed. No money in the world could make me do this, but one thing would. Your promise in living color on my program that you will have a full pot of coffee in your office. Go ahead, I want to embarrass you. What happened the last time, huh?
Well, we had to go out and get the coffee.
Yeah, he comes in with a bag with a 2-pound can of coffee and says, here's your coffee. Yeah, for crying out loud. Let's get back to some serious talk here. Talking about safe sex now. Besides programs like Not Me, and besides the AIDS awareness programs you have in your office there, and AIDS offices all over the country, what are the steps that a thinking teenager should take, for instance? They have no knowledge. They want to find out about it, and they're scared. And I know there's a lot of them out there looking for answers, and they're not getting them. They haven't seen Not Me. They haven't known where your office is, or nobody's told them about it. If there's a teenager watching this program anywhere in the United States today, and he or she is scared silly because they might have something, what do they do?
I would encourage teenagers to contact their local AIDS office, AIDS project, or the county health department. They can probably call information and ask for some, just for an AIDS project, and they'll probably be able to find something. They can go to their school nurse. And finding out information on your own is great, but also for teenagers to be an advocate to educate other teens in their schools would be great. And go to the principal or the PTA or whoever you need to go to, or the school nurse, to get permission to have the AIDS project to come in and do a presentation and talk about HIV and how it's transmitted and how to protect yourself.
How about school or faculty or principals that would be interested in getting a program like that into the school?
Again, I would say for them to contact their local AIDS project and try to work with the experts to get something developed for wherever your school is. And a lot of the parents are not letting AIDS education into the schools, or not as much as we would like. Even some of the schools here in our county won't let us do a condom demonstration, won't let us show a condom to the students. We can talk about it, but they all have their different rules,
Yeah, it's strange. Something is fundamentally wrong when we won't show a condom in a schoolroom or how to use it. But boy, will we have a heart-rending, sob sister, tear-jerking memorial service for the kid after he's dead.
Right.
They'll have big, fancy memorial, but they won't prevent the child's death by saying, hey, this is a way to narrow the odds.
I had a friend who died several years ago, and he must have been probably 35 or 40 when he died. And within the year before he died, at a support group we were at, there were some condoms out. And this man, who would say was 35 at the time, had never, ever used a condom or ever had one or held one. 35 years old. And we just have to get the word out. To make condoms effective, people have to be able to touch them, and they have to know how to use them so that they do the job they're supposed to.
That's odd, too. I find with people who are not experienced with those things, it's almost as though they're, right out of the package, it's something unclean. I want to handle it I don't want to put my whole hand on it.
Right.
Where does this mindset come in? It seems so adolescent.
Just because of the taboo that society has put on it, I think. And a lot of, at our safe sex workshops and our volunteer trainings, we have people take out the condom and feel them and taste them and touch them and, pull on them and get comfortable with them so they can do that.
Have you had the assistance and the support of your local health departments here?
Oh, definitely. The Monterey County AIDS Project works very closely with many local agencies, some private, and then of course the government too, the Monterey County Health Department, very closely with the AIDS case management, with the counselors, and quite a number of different programs within the county.
A lot of our educational programs are intertwined, like with the health department. We kind of have a partnership with them, and we're doing this together.
Incidentally, while we're on the subject, before I forget it, just reading in the paper here a few days ago, the doctors or the health department had discovered that the HIV infection, though is lacking in symptoms to begin with, has a viral something or other, and the secret of successful treatment is to get your chemical treatment or whatever is the lifestyle treatment, everything going immediately upon discovering you have it. Not saying, well, I got 10 years, so I'll wait until 9 years are gone and then get it. Do you know a little more about that?
Say 5 years ago, there was very little that could be done for someone who was HIV positive. And a lot of people felt, why even bother to get tested? And certainly now that is different. There's a lot that can be done to keep people healthy longer. And part of what has been said all these years is that there's this latency period from the time of infection to the time where the virus is very active and doing its damage in the body. And what this study said that they came out with was that from the time of infection, the HIV is actually doing its thing, multiplying, reproducing in the lymph nodes. And at some point, it begins to spill over into the body, and that's when it really starts to ravage the immune system and the body.
Early intervention is the secret then, I assume.
Absolutely, absolutely. The sooner someone knows what's going on with their system, whether they're HIV infected or if they're not, how to keep from getting HIV infected, they need to become proactive. And the catchphrase for that is early intervention. Intervening as early as possible to do as much as you can.
And of course that presupposes early testing.
Exactly.
The least bit of doubt you have.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Unless someone is being totally celibate, or totally drug-free, like say with needles, they should be getting tested regularly.
Are you and this is a critical point, I think, are you suggesting that they be tested even if they are not in, quote, a high-risk group?
Absolutely.
In other words, a traveling salesman.
It only takes having an experience with an individual once, only once. as we've talked about before, you don't need to be promiscuous.
When you've had sex with one person, you've had it with every person that person has had sex with.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got early intervention as the gospel truth when it comes to a correct approach to this. How about any new treatments, therapies, or things like that on the horizon? You want to share anything about that?
Yeah. A couple of the best new things are they are constantly coming out with what we call antiviral drugs like AZT, DDI, DDC, and there's more coming down the road. That's one approach to it. The other is they're coming out with some therapeutic vaccines that also look pretty promising, which are therapeutic. They're not the kind of vaccines that are going to prevent somebody else from becoming infected.
But they
once
will
you're
prolong
infected,
the healthy life.
They're hoping that you'll produce antibodies from getting this vaccine, and that'll keep the virus at bay. The antivirals are part of early intervention. Usually once your immune system starts being depleted, they start you on the antivirals to slow down the progression of the virus and then the progression to full-blown AIDS.
So what we've got then is first the person has to get over the fear of testing, the sense of denial, pursuing the thing, early intervention, and then adjusting a lifestyle to a most healthy thing. So what's that phrase you use? Be around when the cure is here?
For the cure, yeah.
Amen to that.
And it's kind of adjusting your mentality to the fact that instead of accepting that you have this fatal illness, accepting that you have a chronic illness and it's something that you're going to be needing to go to the doctor for and be managing probably for the rest of your life, but not that you're necessarily going to die.
Yeah. This makes so much sense. I know this is not germane nationwide, but the fact that you have opened up a second office in an area like this, I think might be of interest to people regardless of where in the country they live. What forced you to open a second office in the same population, or if you will, in our terms, a market area?
Exactly. I think that our new office just reflects the increasing epidemic that we're dealing with. And we opened the new office out of necessity. The office that we had before was comfortably housing 4 staff people, and we had doubled to 8 staff people with no new space available, and we worked that way for about a year with 8 staff people. Finally, we were all tripping over each other, and it was just a madhouse in there. We had 8 staff people and only 4 lines, 4 telephone lines, and it was difficult to get through to anybody, and we were all always looking for an empty room to be able to do counseling or whatever it was we needed to do. So finally, we got the funding and opened this new office, and we're also adding on, as Jim said earlier, 2 more staff people, so we'll be a staff of 10. And that increase in staff has happened over the last 4 years. 4 years ago, we had 1 staff person. 4 years later, we're about to have 10. So it's a 10-fold increase.
I am fascinated with what you're telling me here, which I know to be a fact nationwide, as against this idiotic federal government report here a while back. I don't know why the taxpayers stand still, but these were alleged experts who hundreds of thousands of dollars spent for these morons to come and make a news release saying that the AIDS thing will die of its own accord, that it's a limited thing to a highly specialized section of society. We're going to get back into this because that was the most stupid, idiotic thing I've ever seen. But again, it's typical of government. I don't know where they got their heads, in the clouds or in the sand, but it was stupid on the face of it. Let's get back and discuss some of these things, because somewhere along the line, something is terribly, terribly wrong. We'll be back right after these few important words from some of our wonderful sponsors who let this program get on the air wherever you're seeing it. Be back in a moment. Just before the break, we were talking about this idiotic federal report that came out by some morons who are overpaid and overrated, I guess, with the federal government on this being a limited disease that will simply disappear if we just ignore it. God help us as a nation if we listen to this garbage anymore. You have any comments on this yourselves? This must drive you people right up the wall.
It does. It's so important for the government and people in general not to get lackadaisical and not to start to, I think people get like HIV overload, and God, we've been hearing about that for 10 years. We're tired of it. But we can't get that way, because it's going to cost lives if we're like that, if we don't get out the education and prevention information, and it's going to cost dollars. For every dollar spent on preventing this illness, we're going to save millions of dollars on the treatment that it costs.
For some reason,
to
we
take
don't
care
want
of
to take
people
the
once they
long
get
view
sick.
of this thing.
Exactly, exactly. That's what most of the politicians are saying is, we don't have the money, but it's like, hey, what do you think is going to happen in 5 years?
Again, I had a program recently here with the District Attorney of Santa Cruz County on board, and we were discussing that Robert Alton Harris case again. $15 million to defend this or try and get this guy into the gas chamber, answering the ACLU's constant challenges to a death sentence. Look what that $15 million could have done in terms of educating the public on AIDS and saving decent lives that need the help. I just don't understand this. Anyhow, listen, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have an exercise here this afternoon. I have heard about all the flack you can't believe the flack I get when we have a program like this. And I guess they assume that news commentators and so forth and so on are hard-skinned, and we can take. And so they with you folks, it may be diplomatic. With me, they're not. So I'm going to play the super redneck, okay? And I'm going to talk to you and ask you questions, just like some of these individuals have asked me questions or made statements. I won't threaten you like some of them have threatened me if I put any more of this Antichrist stuff and all this kind of garbage. Okay, so here we go. Just call me Joe Redneck then, okay? Now be and remember, don't take this personally.
Right.
We're pretty tough.
Okay. You know the trouble with you young people? You're so darn preoccupied with sex. That's all you understand, sex and needles. What are you teaching my kids? If I have them, all they know about is needles for hypodermic injections of drugs or having sex. You people, what are you? God forbid that I have any more people like you in this country.
I think that goes right back to what I said earlier about the reality of what's going on. Ideally, it would be great if young people weren't having sex, if older people weren't having sex outside of marriage. That's the ideal, but the reality of it is that people have sex outside of marriage. That's the reality, and that's what we have to deal with. So it's not that I know we're not promoting sex outside of marriage, we're not promoting promiscuity, we're not promoting loose sex. What we're saying is, if you're going to do it, if that's the reality of what's going on in your life, if that's the way it is, then you need to do whatever you can to keep from getting infected with HIV.
What you're trying to do is confuse me with facts.
Sorry, Bob.
All right. Second one. Don't you know what the good book says about promiscuous sex? What are you, a bunch of godless communists?
Well, all I would say to that is that, again, people who get infected with HIV aren't necessarily promiscuous, and to the students, the teenagers who we are trying to reach out to and educate and teach them about safer sex and condom use may fall in love with somebody, and this is the person that they want to be there with for the rest of their life. They aren't thinking that they're promiscuous, but they have sex with that person without a condom, and they could get infected with HIV.
Kind of reminds me of I've got to drop my character here for just a moment. We're talking about this, and I alluded to the fact that a lot of preachers, and I'm sure a lot of them are sincere, but my mind flashes on Jimmy Swaggart telling everybody what's happening. And I wondered if he used a condom or not in his sexual promiscuousness. Right. But he'd get up on stage and wave that Bible around and tell you how you're going to hell. Yeah. And this is the kind of hypocrisy that I find is working so I don't know. All right, number 3 approach. Not my kid. I don't care what you damn fools say. I raised a good kid. I know my child. He would never do anything that'd get him in trouble.
I'm sure you did. You probably have the best kid around. But I'd want to ask you this. Isn't it worth taking a chance and talking about safer sex and talking about condom use now when it's a little embarrassing than having to come back and make the funeral arrangements for your child? Because you were too proud or too convinced that you had done such a good job that your kid would never have sex or use a needle.
You're trying to confuse us again with fact, aren't you? Why do you do this? All
Sorry.
right. How about the school teacher and the PTA, the local PTA? It says, no, I tell you, now I want to work for the kids, and I want to support the school, and I want to pay my taxes. But I don't want my kid taught sex education in school. That's up to my priest or my minister or my rabbi.
Mm-hmm. Carie, want to take that one?
No.
I think that's great, and they may have a point. But again, getting back to reality, how many parents, how many preachers, how many rabbis, how many of these adults that are leaders are doing that? It's real nice to say,
Right.
this is my job as a parent, but as a parent, are you doing that?
I also think that a lot of times in the schools, it's one parent or one group of parents who stop the HIV sex education coming into the school, when why not just and they prevent other students from getting that education also. Instead, why don't we let it into the school, and if you feel that strongly that you don't want your child to be in there, then take your child out, but don't stop it for everybody else. Maybe you don't know how that other child is being raised. Maybe you think that it should be taught in the home, but maybe the other parents aren't teaching it in the home. And if you are, and you don't want your student to be in the school on the day that sex education is taught, then keep them home that day, but don't prevent other people from getting the education just because of what's happening, what you see.
Well, I've got a question I've just got to ask as a natural consequence of all of this nonsense. And that's, with all the teaching on birth control and all this Planned Parenthood garbage, we still have runaway birth rates here with the unmarried. We got 12 and 13-year-old girls having babies. They're babies themselves yet. How do you explain this?
I don't know how to explain it except for to say that that's just one point that we can point to as far as HIV education, which says that, look, they are having sex, and they're going to continue to have sex. So let's let them know how to have safer sex, because if they're getting pregnant, they're putting themselves at risk for HIV. So that's just one more thing that we can look at and say, we need to get them educated so they aren't dying in 10 years.
Again, common sense. I like that. I like this playing this skit. That was good.
Kind of fun.
You bore up under it well. Let's get back to the serious non-theatrical approach to this thing. What kind of money does it take to finance a full-time office like you have in either one of your locations? And how can the community help underwrite those costs? Because we're talking about them saving their own kids' lives in their own neighborhood and their own cities. Briefly, could you tell us what the costs are? Or?
Our budget this year for the Monterey County AIDS Project ending this fiscal year is about $350,000. The next fiscal year it will approach $500,000, and that's at a little under 200 clients.
And that covers staff, utilities, rent, mailers, mail lists, and all this sort of thing.
Total budget. And how people can help, certainly financial contributions, but donations in kind, donating copying paper.
Something as simple and forthright as that.
Exactly. You know, it doesn't have to be this big, profound contribution, but just if everyone can do just their part, it all makes a difference.
And on that very, very profound note, we're going to hang in here for just a minute while we break for some spots again, and we'll get back to. I want to discuss this a little more right after the commercial break. So you hang in, don't you go away, and you viewers, you stay with us too. We'll be right back.
Did you do it? When you do it? If you do it?
He took me to his bedroom.
And then what?
Well, I knew where things were headed.
Did he have protection?
It was intense. I was scared to death.
And him?
He was shaky.
You think it was the first time? I hope so. You don't know? How can you be sure? Wow, what about AIDS? Babies? Did you use anything?
Did he use anything?
Come on, he's not stupid.
So he did?
Uh-huh.
And if he didn't?
She did. She did? Uh-huh. They were safe. We played it safe.
Back again with this discussion on the AIDS epidemic nationwide, and with what we're doing about it here in the Monterey Bay area of California. How about mandatory testing? Any comments, thoughts, or conjecture? Go ahead, Carie.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience just yesterday because a nurse from one of the Army bases came to talk to me about that in the military, people are mandatorily tested every 2 years. And she was finding that people who were HIV positive were still coming into the clinic with new STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, and also that with all the education and with the threat of mandatory testing, that new soldiers were constantly still coming in with new diagnosis of HIV infection. And she was asking me, what can we do? You know, what kind of educational tools do you use to help, you know, get across to different communities? And I was just as frustrated as she was, but it just pointed out to me how mandatory testing just doesn't do the job. And a lot of people say if everybody just got tested, we could end this epidemic right now.
Well, actually, no, because you can be tested today, and if you continue a lifestyle that is high risk.
Exactly.
Well, that was one of the things that Carie mentioned earlier about this nurse with the Army base, was that some people know that soldiers, military people are being tested, so they think it's safe.
Right.
Because the military won't take people with HIV. So some people are even saying, you know, it's okay to have sex with someone in the service.
Right. It's this false sense of security, right? Because who knows what they did just yesterday.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the mandatory testing here has not stopped the spread or the transmission of HIV at all.
Of course, voluntary testing helps as far as getting people into the healthcare system.
The bottom line, though, is people have to be willing to make changes in their life. Because even if you voluntarily get tested and you're HIV negative, say, unless you make changes to make sure you stay negative, the testing is pointless.
Right. If you keep up the same behaviors and whatever
Again,
you're doing, and just
syndrome,
just keep going to get tested every 6 months, that's not preventing you from getting infected.
We also left abruptly for a commercial break when we were discussing community involvement and how the community can help. We were talking about reams of copy paper and things like that. So basic an item, and what else? What else do you need there? Give me a wish list verbally.
Food, blankets.
When you say food, what kind of food can you use?
Canned food. We can use some fresh produce. You know, the kind of macaroni, pasta, noodles, rice, anything like that. But a lot of canned food and canned vegetables and canned stuff is good because a lot of people with AIDS don't have the energy to make a whole big meal, and they'd rather just pop open a can of something and
I would
eat
presume the same type of food service you have available through your office is available through AIDS offices all over the country then.
Sure.
Hopefully,
So you folks listening anywhere in the United States, remember, you can help, whether it's personal involvement or a contribution of food or Xerox paper, a little time, and if you're given to prayer, a lot of prayer.
Amen.
In any event, keep this in mind, folks. These people really need help, and they're your neighbors and your friends and, yeah, your children. Let's get back to this a couple of minutes here on this whole thing of volunteering, because that tweaks me. On our first program, you said you had a 9-year-old volunteer over there? I'm sure everybody said, what does a 9-year-old do?
Actually, this 9-year-old is a 9-year-old who's HIV positive, and he does public speaking. He goes to Rotary clubs and to elementary schools, and he talks about the fact that he's HIV positive and what that means for him and how he lives his life, and lets the other kids know, I'm just a kid just like you, and don't discriminate against me. And he's done a lot. He's done also a lot of media
fantastic.
work.
That's
He's wonderful.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
He touches
Wonderful.
a lot of people's heart.
He brings
Adults,
out the
I can
compassion.
believe that.
So, yeah.
I can believe that.
We have a number of volunteers who have seen this little boy talk and have come in to volunteer because he has moved them. So
Let's be sure, though, that people don't have to be HIV positive to be a volunteer over at your AIDS office or anywhere else. Anybody can be.
definitely.
Most of our volunteers are not HIV positive.
Yeah, I
by
think,
far.
You know, a lot of people have they're afraid of their reputation being tarnished if they're seen in an AIDS office, and this is so foolish. You know?
This is probably off the subject, but I don't hope you don't mind if I interject this.
If I did, I'll break your kneecap. Go ahead.
Okay. Earlier you talked about, like, how can we get the point across to teens to take this seriously?
Yeah.
And Carie mentioned certainly after hearing about it for 10 years, there's a tendency to say, oh, that's the same old stuff. And I can say I tested positive about 5.5 years ago. And even as someone who's living with HIV, after a while, you you kind of become numb to it. It becomes unreal until you become really personally affected, like if you get sick
Yeah.
or friends start to die.
Yeah.
So people really, unfortunately, need to become personally involved like that, like even through volunteer work. But I think the bottom line is that we have to stop making this an us versus them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, this isn't going to happen to my son or my daughter. This happens to other people. And that's totally absurd.
And it has to be considered as a community-wide. It
Yeah.
is our disease. It is
And-
our problem.
And that's manifested in just this idea you had about people being hesitating to volunteer because what will their friends think if they're volunteering for an AIDS agency? But it's,
Yeah.
I mean, that just keeps perpetuating the whole discrimination issue and the myth and all the just untruths, the lies. You know, this is not someone else's thing.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, and you know, until people really stop blaming people and stop thinking that people deserve something like this, nothing is going to change.
If I'm a concerned parent, and we touched on this once before, I've got a teenage son or daughter, and I have this nagging fear. I knew I brought him upright or her upright, but what happens when he or she is out of my sight? And I don't know. I may be a computer programmer, I may be a surgeon, but I don't know the vaguest thing about how to sit down with my son or daughter and talk about sex and AIDS. Can they get help from you folks? Can you counsel a parent on how to counsel kids?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And we can mediate, you know, we can be there too if that's what they need. We can give them pamphlets and books, and maybe the parent isn't the one who's going to do the communicating to the child. Maybe they don't have that relationship. So the parent needs to look at who would be best, who maybe an aunt is like better off or something like that. Kind
Or
of look into
lacking
your
that,
own
a representative or counselor from the AIDS office
exactly.
itself. Well, now let me see. We've got prevention, abstinence. We've got early intervention. We've got early intervention. Let's go through this again for our viewers. Early intervention encompasses what series of steps?
First, getting tested. If you test positive, then it's getting into the medical care system, going and getting your blood drawn and finding out where your immune system's at. Consider the different antiviral drugs that are available. Consider getting in a clinical trial if that's something that you want to do, and getting on the cutting edge of what's happening.
Now, would you explain to our viewers what a clinical trial is?
A clinical trial are drugs, getting into being able to take drugs that are not FDA approved yet, but are still being studied.
An experimental sort
An
of
experimental,
situation.
that's
All
the
right.
word for it, yeah. And then just continuing to, and also making some changes in your life, whether it's quitting your job or switching jobs, or just taking it easy, maybe getting out of a relationship that's real stressful, taking care of yourself more, eating more nutritiously, don't drink as much if that's something you're doing, you know, cut down on drugs if that's
Yeah.
something you're doing, just kind of changing your life so that you're going to live longer.
You have mentioned several times, both of you, this thing about stress. Stress has a very real, profound negative effect on anybody who is HIV positive.
Actually,
it has a profound effect on anybody.
Exactly.
But I mean,
Yes.
with it, this is serious. with
Even
you folks.
people who are HIV negative under a lot of stress, they tend to get more colds, they're more susceptible to the flu or whatever. And for people who are HIV positive, if you're living a very stressful life and have a very stressful job or in a stressful relationship, that's going to depress your immune system.
Yeah. And that's what so touched me on that TV special, Not Me, was the vitality, the energy, and the power of positive thinking exhibited by all of those young people that had they were HIV positive. And I think that's, again, and you guys are a living example of this yourself, that this positive approach to life means so much in
Yeah.
being around when the cure is
Right.
there.
Right.
And this is so critically important. And as you say, if you get stressed out and say, oh my God, I'm dying, I might as well go in a closet and hide.
Right.
Yeah, fine, die.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to happen.
Right. But I think we also need to remember, and Jim and I both try to have this positive attitude. And it's hard though, because we have friends who have as much of a positive attitude as us and are all health conscious, and they still die. And so we have to remember that people still die from this. And
No question
matter
to it, and
how
I don't
much-
mean to
right.
minimize that at all.
Right.
But I suggest that the lifespan is immeasurably increased by a positive outlook as against this,
Right.
well, I might as well give it all up.
And not just the lifespan, but the quality of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people that, it's like they've given up. And they're a long ways from dying, but they've given up.
Yeah.
So the quality of their life is diminished by not having a positive mental attitude.
Well, you know, I've seen that in the regular world. Forget AIDS and HIV. I've seen 90-year-old 20-year-olds, and I've seen 20-year-old 90-year-olds.
Right.
All the state of mind. I've seen people who had nothing to live for and ready to cash in the chips and crawl in the grave at 20, 25 years of age.
Yeah.
Right.
Hopeless, you're giving up to just abandon, you know, this sort of thing. So I can see where this is a pretty general here we go. They're waving boards at me. That means we're going to have to break here in just a few moments for another commercial break, and then we'll be back, I guess, for about the last segment of this program. And if you can think of anything between then and now that we haven't touched on, please think of it. And you, in these closing moments of this particular segment, again, I want the camera to catch you. Would you raise your right hand, please, both of you? I promise to have a pot of black coffee waiting for Bob at the Salinas AIDS Project office.
We do.
Thank you. And now we'll cut to our commercial. In these closing minutes of the program today, I'd like to discuss just very briefly our red ribbon thing. A couple of, again, our production crew. Hey, what's the red ribbon? You're running for office? And no, I'm not running for office. Go ahead. What's our red ribbons all about?
You know, I don't even know where it started. I think it started in the entertainment industry. But if you watch the Academy Awards, they all wear red ribbons, and a lot of people. And it's AIDS awareness, and hopefully when you wear a red ribbon, someone will come up to you and say, what's that ribbon for? And you can say, I support people with AIDS and HIV. And it's just kind of getting the word out and getting people to talk about it so it's not such a taboo subject anymore.
I can see that. Now we all know why we're wearing the red ribbons.
Right.
What do you believe lies ahead for us in the next 24 months in terms of advances in the research, in terms of a cure, or at least a series of chemicals or whatever that might prolong life even longer than it is? Do you see something in the immediate horizon?
I can tell you that I can see it in good and bad, and we do a lot of long-range planning, trying to figure out where do we need to be in 5 years as far as the agency is concerned. And it's mind-boggling, and it's scary for me to even think about the numbers of people that we're going to be seeing in the next 2 years getting sick, and the numbers who are going to die. But also, on the other hand, I'm optimistic about the research that is going on and what may be available.
But let's keep in mind that it is research. No false hopes build up, because I can't think of anything more heartrending than these newspapers. No, they found a cure, and the next day, no, they haven't found a cure. They found something that might work as a...
There have been so many cures found over the years.
Yeah, and to be in that position must be, hopes up and down like a roller coaster.
We learn not to do that, because it's not good for us. We just try to stay steady and just hope that we're here as long as we can be.
And yet remain optimistic. I don't want people to think that we're pessimistic or cynical.
Well, I hate to cut this conversation short, but the clock has run out. My floor director is waving frantically at me, and so I'm going to have to thank you from the bottom of my heart again for your appearance on the show. You two wonderful young people have a very special, special place in my heart. God bless you. And folks, until we meet again, pleasant dreams, if you can.